Sotah Daf Memetes is the last daf in the Masechta. It does contain one Mishnah. The daf is a lengthy daf, but it discusses mostly Agadata, talking about the times of the Churban, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and a bit about Mashiach, and about the Chashivas of Torah learning and Shalom. So let's begin with the last four lines on Daf Memches. The Gemara says, we've seen in the Mishnah that from the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, trustworthy people or people of Amana are gone, says Rabbi Yitzchak. This refers to people who have Emunah, who have trust and faith in the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We have a Brisa of Elazar Hagadol says anybody who has bread in his possession, he has bread in the basket, and he says, what am I going to eat tomorrow? I have bread for now, but what am I going to do for tomorrow? These are people who are small in their emunah, small in their faith. And this is what Rabbi Elazar says, what is pshat in the pasuk in Zechariah that says, Kimi vaz liyaim kitanois, who is cheap on the day of small? That means who causes people who are tzaddikim be'etzem, they earn the lamhaba, but who causes them, what causes them to lose their share in the lamhaba? And that's ketanes. That's because they are small in their faith in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore they lose ultimately some of their lamhaba. It shrinks. Rava says a different shot. Rava says this pasuk is referring to the small people, the children of the people of Yisrael who are Rishayim. And when it says vaz, when it says that they lose, it means that they lose some of the punishment that they would have otherwise received. Because the children die when they're young, in a situation where they do, that takes some of their father's punishment away, because the father say in front of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, or the children say in front of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, since you are collecting from them, why did you knock out their teeth? Meaning to say, since if you plan to punish them in Olam Haba, why did you make them lose their children in this world? And therefore that takes away some of the punishment they would have otherwise deserved. Now the Gemara quotes a few Agadic statements of Avilah Bar Yevarchea. So first of all, he says that not for the prayers for the tefillah of David HaMelech, all of Yisrael would be selling disgusting material, meaning that the only business they would have would be to sell spoiled milk and oil that's stuck on clothing and things like that, and the only people who would buy from them would be the poor people. Obviously wouldn't be making too much money. And where do we see that? Because we have a pasuk in Tehillim that says Shisa Hashem Amleira Lahem Yedu Goyim Enosh Hema Sala, which we translate as Shisa Hashem Amleira Lahem, Hashem gave honor to them, and Yedu Goyim Enosh Hema, and therefore the nations of the world know that they are people and they are not low creatures. And that was the tefillah that David said in Tehillim. He said also, Avilah Bar Yavarchel, he said, if not for the tefillah of Chalak Kanavi, you would have two Talmidei Chachamim who would have to cover themselves with one blanket in order to learn a Torah. Because of how poor they were, they wouldn't be able to afford more than that. And that's based on a pasuk in Chalak that says, Hashem Shemata Shemacho Yaresi. Hashem, we heard what you said, and we feared Hashem pa'olcha bekerev shanim, your deeds in the midst of years. So the Gemara translates that as your deeds, meaning your Torah. The mitzvahs that we learn is bikiruv shnayim. This is two people being close together, and that's the situation which we would be in, except for chayeyu, you gave them life, and therefore they were able to have their own things, and they don't live in such poverty. Says Rav Bar Yevarchel. Further, if you have two Talmidei Chachamim that are traveling along the way together and they're not discussing Torah, they should be burned up in a fire. Like it says in Sefer Melachim, when Elisha and Eliyahu were traveling, a fire came and did not burn them, and that's because they were speaking b'divrei Torah. It says V'hi heim ha'holchem haloich, they were walking v'daber, and they were speaking, and the Gemara understands in a Torah. V'hine rechav eish v'susei eish v'fridu bein shneim, and came down chariots of fire and horses of fire. So that fire would have burned them if not for the fact that they were speaking the b'divrei Torah. Says further, two Talmidei Chachamim who live in one city and they are not on good terms with each other in halacha, and therefore they don't teach each other. One of them is going to be killed by the other by accident, so therefore one will be dead, and the other will have to be sent in to exile. And where do you see that? It's from pasuk in Dvarim. It says, "Lonos shama retzeach asher yirtzach esrei ehu b'vlidas." Why will you have one person who will have to go to Gauss who killed his friend? Because b'vlidas, because they were without Torah. How do you know that das refers to Torah? Because it says in Hashayad Nidmu Amimi Bli Das, my people were without the knowledge, meaning without the Torah. It says Rabbi Yehuda Beider Rav Chia, any Talmud Chacham who learns Torah out of poverty, his tefillah will be heard. He has a special power of prayer. Like it says in Yeshayahu, Ki Am Tzion Yeshiv B'Yerushalayim, the nation sits in Yerushalayim in Zion. B'Chol Leisivka Chanach Yachnecha Lekol Zakecha Kishamasei Anach, and they have a lot of suffering. But Kishamasei Anach, when they pray, you are going to answer them. Then it says further afterwards. It says V'Nasan Lechem Hashem Lechem Tzar Umayim Lachatz. Hashem will give them bread out of. It's referring to people that are given their bread out of strenuous situations, and their water not easy, and therefore we're referring to very stressed and poor individuals here. Says Rabbi Avo, we also give him from the Ziv HaShechina, we give him from the sign of the Shechina. Like it's that afterwards, your eyes will see your teachers. That's the next pasuk. That's the end of this pasuk of Achabar Chanina. Says the pargad is the curtain that closes off Kadosh Baruch Hu's mechitza, as it were, is not locked in front of them, because it says in the same pasuk, "Loi yikonef oid meirachai," will not be a block off from your teacher. Okay. Now the Gemara refers back to the Mishnah where we saw Rishon ben Gamliel says in the name of Rabbi Yeshua, from the day that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, each day has a curse worse than the one before. And that says Rava, at the time of destruction, each day will be worse than the day that comes before it. The curse will get worse day by day. How do you see that? Because the pasuk in the Teichacha says, "B'boker temer mi'itin erev, erev temer mi'itin boker." In the morning you'll say, "I wish it was night," and then at night you'll say, "I wish it was morning." What are you referring to? You mean the next night? You mean you're waiting for at night, you're waiting for the next morning, and morning you're waiting for the next night? Why would you want that? Who says it's going to be better than it is now? Must be referring to the one before. And he's saying, I wish it was not as bad as it is now. It was just as it was before, which means that every day is worse than the period that comes before it. Says the Gemara, if it's so bad, why does the world continue to exist? The Gemara says, because there's two things that are great in it. It has Kedusha Desidra, it has the Kedusha which is said in Velatzion together with the Targum, which counts both as Limud Torah and as Kiddush Hashem, and it has Yehei Rabbah, and that's what keeps the world up. Like it says in the pasuk, Eretz Eifasa Kamei Eifel Tzamaves V'loi Sidarim V'Tefa Kamei Eifel. When you have not Sidarim, when you don't have the Kedusha Desidra and these parshias of the Torah, that is when the world descends into destruction. Next, the Mishnah had said, you don't have dew of bracha, and you don't have taste in fruits after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. The Gemara brings a brisa. Shimon ben Elazar says the lack of tahara, the fact that Klal Yisrael weren't keeping tahara, that is what caused the loss of taste and scent of the fruits, because we took our tahara away. So Kadosh Baruch Hu took that tahara away from the produce, and the lack of meiser is what took away the fattiness, the oiliness, the creaminess from the grain. So Gemara says the story of Huna found a very fatty date. Rashi says it's a special type of the fruit. He took it and he wrapped it in a handkerchief. So his son, Rabba brother of Huna, came and he said, I smell this type of a date. So he said, my son, I see you have tahara. If you're able to smell it, you must have tahara, and therefore he gave it to him. While this was happening, the son of Rabba, who's a grandson of Rav Huna, he came, and the son and Rabba took it and gave it to his son. So now it went from the grandfather to the son to the grandson. So Rav Huna, the grandfather, said, my son, you made me happy, and at the same time you chilled my teeth, which means you made me upset. And this is what people say, great love is from the father to the son, but even greater is the love of that son but greater is the love of the son to his own son than of that son to his father, because he took what he had gotten from his father and he gave it to his son instead of giving it back to his father. The Gemara says Rav Acha bar Yaakov raised Rav Yaakov, his grandson, the son of his daughter. When he grew up, at some point he asked him for some water, and he said, I'm not chayiv and kibbud aim for you because I'm not your son. And this is what children say, you raise him, and still he tells you, I'm your grandson, I'm not your son, I'm not chayiv and kibbud aim for you. Now we get the next Mishnah, which again discusses things that were lost. So the Mishnah says when there were 3 raids on Yerushalayim, 3 different armies that came as part of Chorban Bayis Rishon. First was Aspasinus, Vespasian, who came with his army and did not destroy the city. Then came Titus the first time, and then came Titus the second time, 52 years later. So when Aspasinus' first army came, they made a rule that there should be no crowns for the Chassanim and there should be no Eros, which we will explain. When the second army came, they made a rule there should be no crowns for the Kala, and that a person should not teach his son Greek. When the third army came, they made a rule that a Kala should not go out without period, that is, she should not dress in fancy things and travel in the city, and that will announce that she is a Kala. And the Rabbi Seinu, the Mishnah says, returned, and they permitted the Kala to go out with this appearance, with these fancy cloaks and talisais made of very fine materials and gold. Now, the Mishnah continues now listing off a number of people who were experts in one trait, and when they died, that trait was lost. So when Rav Meir died, there was no longer anybody who knew how to say Mashalom to explain things. When Menazai died, he was the last of the Masmidim, the ones who learned a lot. When Ben Zayma died, there was no longer any good Darshanim, people who knew how to darshan the words of the Torah. When Rabbi Akiva died, it was lost covered Torah. He was able to explain every spike in every letter and every letter themselves, and therefore he gave drashas, and that brought covered Torah. But when he was gone, that wasn't there anymore. When Rav Chanina ben Zaisa died, there were no longer people who could do miracles. When Rav Yossi, the small one, died, there was no longer any tzaddikim, any chasidim, and he's called small because he was the smallest of the chasidim. After he was gone, there was no one left. When Rechel ben Zakkai died, the shine of Chachma is gone. When Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken died, there was no longer any kavod hatayra, and Tahara and Precious were gone. When Rabbi Shmuel ben Pabi died, there was no longer any shine of kahuna. He used to take care of the kahanim. And when Rebbe died, there was no longer a nava, there was no longer humility and yiras chet, and there wasn't any more fear of sin. Now it's not clear where this Mishnah ends, because we have what continues from here is also Tanaim speaking. The Maharsha says this is the end of the Mishnah, and what follows is a brisa. Others say the Mishnah continues until deep into the next Amud. And so it quotes Rav Pinchas ben Yair, who says from the time that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Talmidei Chachamim were embarrassed, they were shamed. People who had yichus were mortified and their heads hung. People who did maisim, that is, people who could do miracles, were not taken care of. People who were strong-armed took control. People who spoke Lashon Hara took control. No one was able to say drashos. No one was able to be mispalel for anyone. And there was no one able to ask for things for us. Who can we rely on? Only on our Father in heaven, on Kadosh Baruch Hu. Rav Elazar HaGadol said from the day that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the Talmidei Chachamim began acting like the school teachers, which is a lower level of Chachama. The school teachers began acting like the Shamashim. The Shamashim began acting like the Ami Haaretz. And the Ami Haaretz went and decreased, were not taken care of, and there was no one to ask. There was no one to be mispalel. Who can we rely on? Only on our Father in heaven. Mishnah, or the Brisa, whichever it is, continues and discusses what will happen in the times of Mashiach, just before Mashiach comes, that we call Ikvasad Mashiach, when you have the footsteps of Mashiach. So it says, chutzpah will mount, you'll have a lot of disrespect, prices will skyrocket, and there'll be a lot of inflation. The grapevines will produce a lot of fruit, but still wine will be very expensive, and that would be, Rashi says, because there's a lot of drinking going on, so it's in high demand. The government will turn to apikarsis. There will be no one to reprove them. No one can ever give mussar to anybody, because everybody will just say, well, you do the same thing. The meeting place of Talmidei Chachamim will become a place of znus. The Galil will become destroyed. A place called the Gavlon will become empty. People who are well established and had wealth and fame will wander from city to city, and they won't find any rest. The wisdom of the Talmidei Chachamim will become odorous. Those who are fear of sin will be repelled, repulsed. Truth will be lacking. The young will embarrass the old. The elders will stand up for the young. A son will denigrate his father. The daughter will rise up against her mother. The daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Uh, One's own household will be his enemies. The face of the nation will be like the face of a dog. A son will not be embarrassed of his father. And what can we rely on? Only on our Father in heaven. According to the other opinion, this is the end of the Mishnah. And according to the opinion the Mishnah ended earlier, this is the end of the Brisa. Now we begin the Gemara, which defines some of the terms that we had seen in the Mishnah about items that were used to adorn or celebrate the Chassan and the Kala and the wedding that were now canceled from the times of the Churban. So the Gemara says, we spoke about the Atara, we spoke about the crown that was used for the Chassan. So the Gemara says that we have a few opinions as to what type was canceled. Rav says only the one, a very fine salt stone. That's the one that they couldn't use. It was a stone made of clear salt that had writings on it that was written with Gopherus, which is brimstone. But if you had a crown that was made out of hadas branches and rose branches, that's permitted. Shmuel said hadas and rose are also forbidden. You could have it as one from reeds and from a plant called chilas. Levi said even those are forbidden, and Levi used to bring a Mishnah that said even those made of reed and chilas are forbidden. Next thing was an eris. So what's an eris? Rabbi Elazar defines it as a type of a tambourine, the way it's described. It looks kind of like a drum, but it makes sound like a bell. Rabba and Rav Huna made something called a tanbura. Tanbura sounds like tambourine, but a tanbura was a drum. Rashi describes it as a drum. So their father came and broke it. And he said to them, you can't have it because it's too similar to the eros. It's similar to the tambourine, which is forbidden. If you want to make a drum, go take a jug or a large kli, like a jug, a pot, stretch a skin over the top and use that as a drum. But it can't look like a tambourine because that's forbidden. Next, the Mishnah said that they forbade the crown of the kalos ataros. Kalos, what's that? So Rabba Bar Chana said in Rav Yechanan, it was a type of tiara that they wore that had a ear shel zav embroidered on it or made out of it. On top, it had a image of a golden city. Of course, Brisa that says this as well. What is a taras kalos? Ear shel zav. It's the golden city. But you're allowed to make a kippah shel midas. That is, you're allowed to make a kind of hood out of fine wool that they could wear. Now, Bryson says chuppahs chasanim is also forbidden. Was chuppahs chasanim that was made out of tongues of gold that were put together that also made kind of a hood that they wore, and that's forbidden. Gemara explains what that is. Of course, a Bryson that says that's forbidden. What you're allowed to do is make the hood out of cloth. Instead of having pieces of gold sewn to it, you could have pieces of wood sewn to it, and then you could have some strings of gold hanging down. And Rashi says this is what they had still in his day. Next, the Mishnah said that they made a rule that a person should not teach his son Greek. Marcos Rabbi says when there was a war between two camps of the descendants of the Chashmonaim, those were the brothers Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, who were fighting over the kingship, the control of Eretz Yisrael. So one, that is Aristobulus, holed up inside the Beis Hamikdash compound, and Hyrcanus was laying siege from the outside. But they had to bring the karbonis. So every day the people on the inside would take money from the kupa, the box where they kept the machzas shekel, to buy the karbonis, the carbon talmud. They would send it down from the wall in a box, and then they would take it, use it to buy a sheep, and send it up. And one time, there was one old man who knew Greek, and he went and he stitched on them, and he said, as long as they are doing this avodah, those on the inside are never going to be captured by those on the outside. So they decided to stop the practice, and when they sent down the dinarim, the money, the next day, they sent, instead of sending up a sheep for the carbon, they sent up a pig. And when he was lifted to halfway up the height of the wall, he stuck his nails in the wall, and Eretz Yisrael shook for a distance of 400 amas by 400 amas. And at that time they said, cursed is the one who raises pigs, and cursed is the one who teaches his son Greek. In that time, we learned that they destroyed the plants near Yerushalayim, so they couldn't have barley for the Korban Omer. They planted in the roofs of their homes, and they were able to grow barley there to use for the Korban Omer. And they had the Shtei Halechem from Ein Socher. That's where they got the flour for that. Now, the Gemara asks, is it true that they were forbidden to speak Greek? But we have clear indication that they spoke Greek. And that's that Rebbe said as follows. He said in Eretz Yisrael, why do they speak Aramaic? They should speak either Lashon HaKodesh or Greek. Those are much more beautiful languages. Rav Yosef said, in Bavel, why do they speak Aramaic? They should speak either Lashon HaKodesh or Persian. So you see that Greek should and could be spoken. So Gemara says that's different. That's Greek language. Here we're talking about Greek Chachma. Greek language you're allowed to speak, but something called Greek wisdom, that you're not allowed to speak, that you're not allowed to have. Gemara asks, is that forbidden also? We have a proof that that's not forbidden either. Rav Yehuda says, name of Shmuel, name of Shimon ben Gamliel. What's the explanation of the pasuk that says, Eini oila lenafshi mikol b'nai ziri? My eyes wail on myself because of all the daughters of my city. So that means my father's house had 1,000 children, and 500 of them learned Torah, 500 of them learned Greek, learned Chachma Yavanis, which we said is forbidden, and all that is left is me and my brother's son. My father is in Asia, and I'm here. So why does it say here that they were allowed to learn Chachma Yavanis? So this is different. This was the house of Rabbi Gamliel, because he was close to the kingdom, he was close to the government, he was allowed. Or a Brisa that shows this. The Brisa says that one is not allowed to take a special kind of haircut that the Amoreans took, because it's Midarki Amori. It's an Avodah Zarah symbol. But Avtulus ben Ruvain permitted that they could take that haircut because he was close to the king. And the house of Gamliel were permitted to learn Chachmas Yavanis because they were too close to the king. Next, we said in the Mishnah that when the last army came, they canceled the Aperion. The Gemara says that was because of Tznius. Now the Gemara brings a brisa that goes through the list of things that were lost when certain Talmidei Chachamim were lost, and this parallels the Mishnah. So the brisa says when Rebbe Eliezer died, the Sefer Torah was hidden because he had the whole Sefer Torah laid out, and all the halachos, he understood them clearly. From the time that Rabbi Yeshua died, Eitzah, Umachshava, advice and wisdom, were gone. From the death of Rabbi Akiva, the arms of the Torah were lost, and the well springs of wisdom were stopped up, because Rabbi Akiva understood all the Ramazim and the Drushes and the reasons for everything, and he was able to teach that. And when Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, when he died, the crowns of wisdom were removed, because the crowns of wisdom was his wealth. When Mechanina ben Daisa died, the people who did miracles were gone. When Abba Yossi ben Ketunasa, when he died, Hasidim were gone. He was called Abba Yossi ben Ketunasa because he was the smallest of the Hasidim. When he was gone, they were all gone. When Ben Azai died, the Masmidim were lost. When Ben Zayma died, the Darshanim were lost. When Shimon Gamliel died, then oppression and suffering increased, and when Rebbe died, they became twice as much. Now, last line in the Gemara, referring back to the Mishnah, we said that when Rebbe died, humility and fear of sin were lost. So Rav Yosef said to the Tana, don't say that humility was lost because there's still me. And Rav Nachman said to the Tana, don't say that fear of sin was lost because there's still me. Hadran Allah Mesecha Sotah v'Hadrach Alon. Hadran Allah Mesecha Sotah v'Hadrach Alon. Hadran Allah Mesecha Sotah v'Hadrach Alon.